How are you talking?
Minutes. Yeah, I mean, it was here and gone. Nobody got hurt. Right. There's the key. So this stuff can all be replaced.
Well, cleanup is well underway here in Heartland, Minnesota. This small town, population just over 300, really got the brunt of it. They lost the only bank in town there behind me and the only post office in town right around the corner. And tonight, throughout the Midwest, roughly 280,000 people remain without power, Nora.
Molalengi, thank you. Well, tonight, the 2-month hostage situation in Haiti has come to an end. The final group of Christian missionaries abducted by...
That we can't increase their level of care because we don't have the beds.
In Wisconsin, just 3% of ICU beds are available.
Ciao.
Any one of us would step up and show them what it's like to do it and how rewarding it is, and, you know, just show them the ropes of it.
In Sioux Falls, Cordell Wright, Dakota News Now.
Still to come here at 5:30. When it comes to cooler weather, we often think about things like getting sick, but there are a few other things that doctors tend to see more of this time of the year. Details on that still ahead.
And even though temperatures will be a little bit warmer tomorrow, colder air building in for the start of the weekend, and even before we get there, snowfall tomorrow. We'll break down all the details in your First Alert forecast.
Thank you, sir. A holiday tradition returning next week.
Johnson & Johnson saying they remain confident of its benefit-risk profile of its COVID vaccine. And David, these blood clots are very rare. But given the choice of vaccines, the CDC panel recommended opting for Pfizer or Moderna when possible, but stressed that COVID itself carries a much higher risk of blood clots. This will now be reviewed by the CDC director. David.
All right, Stephanie Ramos with us tonight. Stephanie, thank you. We know many of you at home have a lot of questions, particularly with Christmas Eve 1 week from tomorrow, families planning get-togethers. And so let's bring in Dr. Ashish Jha, Dean of the Brown University School of Public Health. Dr. Jha, always great to have you with us. And first, let's get right to it. We heard from the CDC already that this new variant, Omicron, is doubling every 2 days or so. It's one thing to hear that from them. It's another thing to start hearing it and seeing it from people in your everyday lives, anecdotally. I'm hearing from a lot of people, family and friends, colleagues, who are seeing this. I'm curious, does this simply underscore just how transmissible this is? And has the speed of this been eye-opening even for you?
Yeah, good evening, David. Thank you for having me back. The speed of this transmission has been eye-opening for all of us. Even in the last week or 10 days, it has moved faster than I expected, and it's spreading quite rapidly across the country.
I wanted to bring up something we just heard late this afternoon from New York City's health commissioner. He said we are seeing a steep rise in cases here in New York City, for example, coupled with the threat of this more contagious Omicron variant. He even goes as far as to say, consider upgrading your mask to a KN95 or KF94 mask. They're signaling here in New York to take this seriously.
Yeah, absolutely, David. This variant is spreading widely. For people who are, I think vaccinated and protected, it's maybe not as much of a problem. But for a lot of other people, I think getting infected could end up getting them sick. So I think we absolutely need to take this very seriously right now.
You bring up vaccinations and
her colleagues call her peaceful and law-abiding, pull her gun instead. And Wolf Court ended early today. The defense said it will call 2 witnesses to testify tomorrow. The person everyone wants to hear from is Kimberly Potter. She has the opportunity to look members of the jury in the eye and tell them what she was thinking during that moment. This body camera video, all of 13 seconds, shows how life changed not only for the Wright family, but Potter as well. Her former boss testified today he resigned because of political pressure, saying he refused to fire Potter at the time of the shooting. Wolf?
All right, Adrian, thank you very much. Adrian brought us reporting. Let's get some more on all of this. CNN senior law enforcement analyst, the former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe is joining.
The Medal of Honor to Master Sergeant Earl Plumley for his heroism in Afghanistan. Sergeant First Class Alwyn Cash and Sergeant First Class Christopher Solis received the medal posthumously.
Outnumbered with no regard for his own safety, at times armed with only a pistol, Staff Sergeant Plumley attacked the insurgent forces, taking them on one by one.
10 insurgents wearing Afghan army uniforms and suicide vests blew a 60-foot hole through the base wall with a 400-pound car bomb in Ghazni province in 2013. Plumlee, an active-duty Green Beret, killed one Afghan insurgent using a grenade and another suicide bomber with precision sniper fire.
It's a life-or-death profession that we're in. You may only get one chance to get something right, so put your all into it and do it to the best of your ability.
Sergeant First Class Alwyn Cash is the first black recipient of the Medal of Honor since Vietnam.
Alwyn Cash was a soldier's soldier, a warrior who literally walked through fire for his troops.
He pulled 6 fellow soldiers out of a burning Bradley fighting vehicle in Iraq in 2005, even though he himself was drenched in fuel. He died in a U.S. Army hospital with burns over 72% of his body. 3 of the 6 soldiers survived. He was the youngest of 10 children.
I tell anybody, he taught me to live, enjoy it, make the most out of every opportunity, because you don't always get a do-over.
Sergeant First Class Solis put himself between the Taliban and a rescue helicopter during a fierce firefight in Afghanistan 3 years ago.
Sergeant Solis used his body as a shield for the aircraft and his crew against the heavy incoming fire.
He waved off the pilots who wanted to return for him after he'd been shot, knowing they would all likely die if they did.
He didn't believe in awards and everything. He believed that you did good for the sake of doing good.
At the Pentagon, Jennifer Griffin, Fox News.
Amazing stories. Up next, the panel, Mark Thiessen, Molly.
Both women are choosing to remain anonymous. The first claims Noth raped her in his Los Angeles apartment in 2004 after first kissing her. It was very painful and I yelled out, "Stop," she says, and he didn't. She tells The Hollywood Reporter she later went to the hospital for stitches. The other alleged incident more than a decade later in 2015, a server at a New York nightclub saying she went on a date with the actor and they ended up in his apartment. It was there, the woman claims, Noth forced her to have sex, telling The Hollywood Reporter, "I was kind of crying as it happened." In a statement, Noth calls the accusations categorically false, adding, "No always means no. That is a line I did not cross."
To new beginnings.
Today, Peloton pulling the viral ad that caused a sensation after Noth's HBO character was killed off. The company saying every single sexual assault accusation must be taken seriously. And Noth saying that these encounters were consensual, adding, "I did not assault these women." David?
Ariel Reshef tonight. Ariel, thank you. And from Haiti tonight, the 12 remaining members of an American missionary group kidnapped 2 months ago have now been freed. Ohio-based Christian Aid Ministries issuing a statement saying,
Mission products, we're a fiduciary.
David Martin.
A mother and daughter received the Medal of Honor 3 years after their husband and father, Army Ranger Christopher Solis, used his body to shield a battlefield casualty in Afghanistan.
I'm in awe that he would be so selfless, but that's who Chris was. I wouldn't have expected anything less.
8 years ago, Master Sergeant Earl Plumlee stepped into the breach to stop a suicide attack on his outpost in Afghanistan.
You see 10 guys coming at you. What did you think?
That I would be killed.
So what do you do when you think you're going to be killed?
Try and take a few of them with me.
16 years ago, Sergeant First Class Alwyn Cash pulled his soldiers from a burning vehicle in Iraq.
Flames that are just spewing out of every port out of the Bradley fighting vehicle.
Lieutenant Colonel Leon Mathias was there.
He's going in and out of the Bradley trying to pull them out one by one, and it's just an intense inferno.
Colonel Jimmy Hathaway arrived on the scene.
Here's Sergeant Cash, who's been burned, 70-some-odd% of his body, who's still standing up, still walking around, still pushing everybody to take care of his boys, as he would say first.
Cash and 3 other badly burned soldiers were medevaced to the United States. His sister Kazanal was at his bedside. He was still worried about his boys.
He was like, just please tell them to fight. They can do this.
One by one, the soldiers died.
He was the last one to pass away.
Ever since, Cash's sister has been leading the campaign to recognize his sacrifice.
I just want to know that Sergeant First Class Alwyn C. Cash has been awarded the Medal of Honor that he earned.
Honor delayed, but no longer denied. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
Never too late to honor these heroes. All right, still ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, investigators issue a search warrant for Alec Baldwin's cell phone. What are they looking for? And Bruce Springsteen, born to break a record.
Back in, the wind not being very strong is actually going to help us out quite a bit. So let's talk about that snowfall on Futurecast. We're not going to deal with any of it tonight. It's really not going to start to develop until around 6 to 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, right around Huron, Brookings, Watertown. Then that starts to make its way to the north. And it's going to be more of that light to moderate snow, kind of a steady snowfall throughout tomorrow afternoon, primarily in the northeastern portions of the viewing area. This is the noon hour. Again, everything well north of I-90, but Aberdeen, Watertown, right around Marshall, Minnesota, this will persist into the afternoon. Then that cold front moves through, and that's going to spark a few of those flurries that'll be making their way on in, but really nothing for accumulation, perhaps a few tenths of an inch at best. That's really all that we're going to be seeing further west. Northeast, meanwhile, about 2 to 4 inches of new snowfall. A couple of spots, potentially some isolated higher totals than that, but just kind of a light, steady snow. It won't be that heavy snow that we saw last Friday further south. We won't see any of the snowfall accumulating in Sioux Falls. A few flurries potentially late Friday night, but that's about it. Cold Saturday, only in the upper teens for highs. Morning lows back in the single digits. Aberdeen, you see snow tomorrow, 2 degrees below zero as you wake up on Sunday morning. Not very ideal, but we'll be in the 20s next week with generally quiet weather. And in Pierre, some flurries later in the day tomorrow, mainly tomorrow night. Saturday, you're in the upper teens. You're even back to 40 on Sunday. Stay with us. Dakota News Now. We'll be right back after the break.
Dakota News Now is sponsored by Billion Automotive.
Remember when no dream
per hour. Friday night, cloudy skies, low 13. Winds north at 10 to 20 miles per hour. Here's our 7-day outlook.
Stormy weather whipping up in Omaha, Nebraska. Yesterday's dangerous storms producing some rare tornado reports for the month of December. Very rare for parts of Nebraska, Iowa, and for the month of December. Haven't even had tornado warnings in Minnesota. And now Omaha, with the weather you've seen, you've also been missing something else: snow. Missing a lot of snow for a lot of the U.S. This right here is a snowy scene here in Chicago. This time of year, this is the sort of a thing you'd expect. You get about a half a foot of snow so far at this point in the year. But this year, it doesn't look like this. In fact, as far as snow goes, it's been a no-go. Mostly dry conditions, only a trace, just a trace of snow so far this season here in Chicago. So you might be wondering, what are the chances we're going to get some snow? So starting off with where the snow is now. For a white Christmas, it doesn't have to be snowing on the day or even the night before. It just has to be snow on the ground, an inch or more. Now, ideally, it happens while you're sleeping and you wake up and there's snow, but, you know, the technical definition here. And at this point, 29.3% of the U.S. has snow on the ground. And notice this is a lot of ground where people don't live. A lot of mountainous terrain here and areas where you would expect it. Now, a lot of people do live here in Michigan and Wisconsin, Minnesota, and North Dakota. And it's even some of the northern portions of those states, of our northernmost states, where there's currently snow on the ground. So going in to the rest of this week, staying with some warm conditions around the Gulf Coast. This is also translating up pretty far to the north as well. Initially, right now, seeing some of that cold air in the northern tier where the snow is right now. But this jet stream easily this time of year could be dipping much farther to the south. And the jet stream is important because it separates the relatively cold air, which this time of year is pretty darn cold usually, with the relatively warmer air to the south, which still could be pretty cool, not necessarily warm. But notice this jet stream, even early next week. Now the lead up now to Christmas, and it's still pretty high. A bit of a split flow, so we're gonna have some wet weather to the south, but the coldest temperatures really just reserved for the northernmost locations, then of course also up in the mountains. If there's no color on the map, it's about average. And if there's blue on the map, it's going to be cooler than average, which is not a lot of real estate here across the contiguous 48. A lot of yellow and orange, so warmer than average. Here's the forecast for today and beyond, where there could be snow on the ground. If this computer model is correct, we'd see some snow in the northeast. Now, that's one model that's leading up to the 23rd. Here's Christmas Day, and here's what we're thinking as far as snow on the ground. White, feel pretty good. Likely there'll be snow on the ground, which not a huge area. Even the blue's not a huge area, and that just brings in to the scene here, Molly, where at least it's possible. We still have at least a little bit of hope for snow on Christmas.
You gotta have a little bit of hope, right? Well, that brings us to our question of the day. Are you dreaming for a snowstorm on Christmas?
Governed as anything else but that, but the entire Democratic Party shares his views on rolling back what was working on the border, or destroying the pipelines so that our gas prices go up, or putting trillions of dollars into the economy and having inflation and costs rise. All of these things aren't unique to Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. In some regard, it might even be worse when you go to, outside that field. And so Democrats need to really be honest about why they're unpopular, and it's not the personality of Joe Biden or Kamala Harris.
Mark, on the flip side,
how the heck is he free on bond? That outrage is next on The Beat.
School teachers do some of the most important work across our country, both inside and outside the classroom. One Kentucky school teacher proved just that following those devastating tornadoes. CBS's Lilia Luciano reports.
There's diapers, there's wipes, shoes.
Cammie King's preschool classroom in Dawson Springs is now an overflow storage space for donations.
My initial thought was, how many students and families are we going to lose?
How did you find Dawson Springs?
It was devastating.
Since the tornadoes hit, King, who has been teaching pre-K for nearly 2 decades, has reached out to every family to account for all of her littles, as she calls them.
Hello, it's Miss Cammie from school.
But just the call didn't quite cut it.
They need to know that their connection to this school is out there walking around.
Walking around and offering hugs.
They're different. Littles run up and hug you, but you literally feel all 10 fingers squeezing into your back.
Hi, guys. With nowhere to go, the Clark family is living at a shelter.
We went from a 5-bedroom house to just one little room.
And it's been difficult.
Whether they're current students like Zoe or older ones like her mom, Georgia.
So everybody here has been her student?
Yes, except for this one.
Including mom.
Oh. Miss Cammie doesn't let go.
And I want them to know that I love them. And it's just a feeling that I'm doing the right thing.
Lilia Luciano, CBS News, Dawson Springs. She is such a hero. We'll be right back.
Thousands of women with metastatic breast cancer are living in the moment and taking Ibrance. Ibrance with an aromatase inhibitor is for postmenopausal women or for men with HR-positive, HER2-negative metastatic breast cancer as the first hormone-based therapy. Ibrance plus letrozole significantly delayed disease progression versus letrozole.
Justice.com immediately.
Take a moment to pause and ask.
Some plants grow.
Tepezza may raise your blood sugar even if you do not have diabetes.
Ferrero Rocher.
Rocket Camp.
Oh, that's all good, Daryl. I got a guy.
Rocket.
Introducing Wendy. Fantasy playoffs. Therefore, I am expecting to lose. I will take Patrick Mahomes over 2.5 touchdowns.
At least a dozen people show up to each of them. And you can really find out what people are thinking when you make a concerted effort to make sure that people come to you and talk to them.
The American
$26.99. It is a giant throw.
In 5 states. CNN's Brian Todd is working the story for us.
In Kentucky, residents picked through the wreckage of a tornado that we now know was a monster, a mile or more wide at its worst. According to the National Weather Service, it was on the ground for at least 128 miles, and the measurement of that distance will likely increase as more damage surveys come in. But Kentucky's not alone tonight in recovering from freakish, severe December weather. In Lamar, Colorado, a dust bowl. And throughout Kansas Wednesday, dangerous high winds causing several rollovers of semi-trucks.
It's been overwhelming for first responders, including the Kansas Highway Patrol and our troopers. It has been a continuous call after call, rollover after rollover.
In Iowa, the driver of a tractor-trailer was killed Wednesday night when the vehicle was struck by a strong gust of wind and the driver lost control. A tornado in southeastern Minnesota yesterday was the first tornado ever reported in the state in the month of December.
68 years I've been here, and I don't recall ever hearing the word tornado in December.
Nearly 20 tornadoes touched down on Wednesday in Minnesota, Iowa, and Nebraska. Across the Great Plains and the Midwest yesterday, a record was set for a single day in the U.S. At least 55 reports of hurricane-force thunderstorm wind gusts of over 75 miles an hour. That's according to the National Weather Service's Storm Prediction Center.
Certainly the last week of severe weather, the tornadoes last Friday and then the windstorm and tornadoes yesterday are very unusual for December. The winds on Wednesday, that's just something we haven't seen this time of year ever.
About 400 reports of severe wind came in from across those regions on Wednesday, the alerts impacting at least 80 million Americans. High winds whipped up fires in the southern plains and the southwestern U.S.
The fires were breaking out, being fanned by 100-mile-per-hour winds. We had one fire that grew 2,500 acres in less than 2 hours.
Weather experts say much of this is due to unusually warm air from the Gulf of Mexico for this time of year, air that's being pushed northward. Key questions tonight. What effect does climate change have on this, and is this the new normal?
The contribution of climate change to that is probably at least noticeable. That the Gulf is very warm. The Gulf is warmer at this time of year than it's ever been. I don't really think that we're talking about a new normal. It may be a slightly increased frequency, but it's not going to be the kind of thing we're going to see outbreaks like we've seen in the last week on an annual or even every few-year basis.
Could places like the East Coast see more tornadoes in the future? Harold Brooks of NOAA's Severe Storms Laboratory says he doesn't think so, but he says what people across the country have to worry about is more intense and heavy rainfall during future hurricanes and rain events. Wolf.
All right, Brian Todd, thank you very much. President Biden bestowed the Medal of Honor today to 3 U.S. Army soldiers.
News at 6.
An update on a homicide investigation in Millbank, South Dakota. We bring you that story coming up on KELO News.
A drug bust in Sioux Falls turns up fentanyl pills, meth, and stolen weapons. How investigators track down the suspects.
Plus, we look back at the wild weather that moved through the Midwest last night. That's coming up.
Good evening. A Millbank man is behind bars tonight, accused of killing his brother and his brother's pregnant wife earlier this week.
57-year-old Brent Hansen faces charges of first-degree murder, along with 3 alternative counts of second-degree murder.
One of whom was a pregnant woman. The victims have been identified, according to court documents, as Clyde and Jessica Hansen of Millbank and their unborn child. The individuals had injuries consistent with homicidal violence.
Omicron variant and the still dominant Delta variant. The CDC warning cases could surge 55% by Christmas. Deaths could rise 71% by the first week of January. Dr. Fauci is here. What you need to know before gathering for the holidays. Also tonight, the second deadly tornado outbreak in less than a week in this country. Multiple people killed in the central U.S. Hundreds of thousands without power. Minnesota's first December tornado ever. Our team in the the storm zone tonight. Just in, the major decision by the FDA expanding access to abortion pills. Also breaking, the search warrant issued for Alec Baldwin's phone. What police investigating the Rust shooting believe is on it. The Sex and the City star facing accusations of sexual assault. How he's responding. All the remaining American hostages kidnapped in Haiti 2 months ago released. And 3 American heroes all awarded the military's highest honor today.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening. The country appears to be slipping into a COVID vice tonight. The aggressive Delta variant squeezing us from one side, the more contagious Omicron strain multiplying on the other. COVID cases projected to steeply climb as we approach Christmas, followed by a sharp rise in deaths. Tonight, theater doors temporarily closed again on New York's Broadway as a precaution.
The drug task force with this investigation. They tried to stop that car near 57th and Cliff. The car took off at a high rate of speed.
Troopers chased the vehicle for a short time but stopped the pursuit. Authorities found the vehicle crashed nearby, but Andrews ran away. A serviceman then told police his truck had been stolen.
This serviceman said that there was some GPS in the truck, and they used that to track it, and it was found in the 900 block of South Blaine Avenue.
Detectives knew there was a man who lived nearby who associated with Andrews. The drug task force was investigating Carlos Hardy in a separate case and were able to get a search warrant for his house along South Cleveland Avenue.
They ended up calling SWAT because of the possibility there could have been, I guess, some weapons that were used or weapons that may have been found in South Cleveland. So SWAT came in, and ultimately they were able to arrest Andrews without issue.
Investigators found bulk packaging material, a few stolen guns, over a pound of meth, and 11 grams of fentanyl pills at the South Cleveland home. The initial
surge is having.
Many of the new Omicron surrendered. When authorities searched both residences, they say they found nearly 200 grams of marijuana.
Your booster, you're in really good shape, so move now.
Quote, a state COVID guideline. So police on the scene as well were forced.
Insider recorded 49 violations among members of Congress, 182 senior staffers.
Isolated, but still some concerns where we do have debris on the ground. That's where the concerns go up a little bit more because the debris might be blocking some storm drains. It might be.
Bryant was sentenced to 50 years with 25 years suspended. Both pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter.
Random acts of violence such as this impact the entire community's ability to feel safe, to feel secure. An innocent man just doing his job was gunned down in a senseless act of violence over a few coins.
From emotional testimony to arguments over who the true shooter was, digital reporter Eric Mayer has a full recap of the court sentencing on KELOLAND.com.
The South Dakota Supreme Court says a judge should not have dismissed a childhood sexual abuse lawsuit that a woman brought against her former father-in-law. The statute of limitations in South Dakota for sex abuse cases is 3 years. At issue in this case was whether that time had expired. The woman says her future father-in-law started touching and kissing her when she was 14. That was back in 1993. After the woman got married, she began having consensual sex with her father-in-law. The woman told her husband about it, and they divorced in 2015. She then went to a trauma treatment facility where she reportedly began to understand that she was a victim of sex abuse. A Brookings County judge dismissed the child sexual abuse allegations in 2020, saying the woman should have filed the action within the 3-year period of abuse. However, the Supreme Court says the circuit judge had erred and the case should proceed.
Well, we have a much calmer night than what we saw last night. Let's check in with meteorologist Adam Rutt.
Yeah, certainly a quieter night out there. A bit breezy at times, but considering the wind we had yesterday evening at times, I think we can deal with this. To Harrisburg we go on this Thursday evening. 22, a south.
Will be plenty of breakthrough infections, that's for sure. What we're concentrating on is preventing those infections from leading to serious disease, and that's the reason why we're stressing so emphatically the importance of getting boosted if you've been primarily vaccinated.
When you say breakthrough infections, are you including those who have been boosted?
You know, there will be breakthroughs across the board. I cannot imagine that a boosting, Lester, is going to protect you against initial infection. Well, we're hoping that those breakthroughs, as we call them, are going to be very, very mild. But the breakthrough rate will be higher than with Delta.
If you're a family sitting around the table planning your holiday trip and you're watching this right now, what should you be rethinking? What would you advise people, not even in an official capacity, but simply just good old common sense?
Well, again, vaccination is going to make the difference, Lester. I'm a family member, I'm vaccinated, I'm boosted, my wife is vaccinated, she's boosted, my children are coming in by plane from all different parts of the country. They are vaccinated and boosted, so we can feel very comfortable in having our plans to be together as a family in our home with some friends who are also boosted and vaccinated. And I feel we can feel safe. Nothing is 100% risk-free.
And if you were someone who has not received a single vaccination shot, what is a potential outcome? What are you seeing? What do you fear for those individuals as Delta continues to surge?
Well, Lester, I am very concerned about those individuals. They are going to be very vulnerable. You're dealing with a very transmissible virus. We're looking over our shoulder at Omicron, and we have Delta staring us right in the face. It's a very, very vulnerable time for those people who have not been vaccinated.
My thanks to Dr. Fauci in our conversation earlier.
In-depth journalism led by a
several days. For KELOland Weather, I'm meteorologist Scott Munz.
Thanks a lot, Scott. Wednesday night storms brought with it several firsts in South Dakota and across the region.
For example, this is the first time a severe thunderstorm or tornado warning was ever issued in December. That's since records started in 1986.
So is this something we could see again?
But if we see a pattern of more frequent severe weather happening, in the late fall or winter, that would be something notable. But I don't know that we can say that right now. A single day of severe weather probably, can't tell us if this is really going to be happening more in the future.
To see what other weather firsts we saw last night, check out this KELOland.com original by Ray Yost. Well, South Dakota's unemployment rate fell again in November.
According to the Labor Department, the state's unemployment rate is now at 2.7% at this time.
At this point, about why?
Well, I think the same thing is true for every hospital. It's overwhelmingly unvaccinated people coming in. They are young, much younger than they were before. And, I don't think they really have reasons that they're unvaccinated. You ask them, and some people will say that they, were scared about the vaccine. I think there's a lot of false narratives in media, which are it's terrifying patients. Some of them just don't have access to the vaccine. Here at Hennepin, we serve a population that has very limited access to medical care. We have a lot of homeless patients. We have a lot of immigrants. And so I think it's been hard to reach those groups of people to get them vaccinated.
Professor Osterholm, as this is happening, we've seen a lot of people leave the critical care nursing industry, right? Just completely exhausted emotionally, physically, the trauma of what they've gone through. So you have fewer people working there than you had before, and you're about to have a surge that's as big as you've ever had, right? ICUs are full. So in that capacity, you have the possibility for something really awful to happen. But I want to just layer on top of that the rules right now, which are that, according to the CDC, and they just put this out tonight, they said vaccinations aren't enough to slow the spread right now, and that they want, more testing and all of those things. But what they also said was that everyone who is infected, vaccinated or unvaccinated, needs to isolate for 10 days. Okay, that makes sense, except for if it's spreading so widely that everybody's going to get it, including some people who don't get symptoms. If nobody's allowed to go to work for 10 days, hospitals could have a crisis, so could a whole lot of other crucial places, right?
Yes, in fact, what you have here right now is a potential perfect storm. I've been very concerned about the fact that we could easily see, a quarter, a third of our healthcare workers quickly becoming cases themselves. This virus is not going to eliminate its transmission to those who are healthcare workers. It's going to keep going. And so what we have to really do right now is figure out what is our plan? What is our emergency plan for a combination of increasing number of cases and decreasing number of healthcare workers, and part of that is due to the fact that they too are infected. This, I think, is a huge challenge over the course of the next 3 to 8 weeks.
Dr. Z, how worried are you about this, about staffing shortages in light of what you're already facing?
I mean, I think it's the reality is, you know, it's not if we are going to get infected, it's when we're going to get infected. And so I know that, you know, we're already at a staffing crisis. And I mean, I don't know what we're going to do. I think that we have prepared, you know, we have backfill systems in place for when this round of physicians get sick, this round of physician comes in, and we're just going to have to keep doing that, I think. I don't know.
Well, Dr. Z, my thoughts are with you. It's just, it's terrifying. It's tragic. Thank you so much, you know, for even taking the time to share this, and so important for people to hear it and understand it from you who are there on the front line. And Dr. Osterholm, as always, I so much appreciate your perspective and expertise on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
And next, the simple question, did Joe Biden win the election? Why couldn't Republican candidates for governor in Minnesota last night answer that question?
I can't know what I don't know. What I would say is that I don't think the election was fair.
That was last night. Plus anger boiling.
All who have served and sacrificed, and now millions.
Awards, dining, and entertainment. The excitement never ends at Dakota.
The Great Bear says that it needs several days of consistent cold temperatures to cover the area.
You know, obviously there's a little bit of snow left on the ground. That half-inch rain didn't take care of all of it, but yeah.
This holiday season.
This is kind of our last stand here, Joy, because I'll tell you, if Republicans get back the reins of power in the 2022 elections, in the 2024 election, they will never relinquish it again. We are seeing the extraordinary lengths to which Republicans are willing to go to throw out a free and fair election in 2020. If we let them back in the driver's seat of democracy, it's over.
And we now know that Jim Jordan is one of the people who is forwarding text messages with, I wonder what's going to happen with him. Is the Congress going to act on him? Let's do a hard turn. It's not really such a hard turn, Chris Whipple. We now know, per the Washington Post, that the same Republican Party, the official, you know, the Republican Party, they've agreed to pay up to $1.6 million in legal bills for the former president, for Donald Trump. Not for anything related to potentially interfering in the election. Not for the case that he's facing in Georgia that could be a criminal, you know, a criminal proceeding regarding interfering in the election, but for his private legal expenses for more than 10 years of shenanigans with his personal finances and his real estate. Dream with me. The Democratic National Committee doing the same for any Democrat. Not that there's any Democrat who's, you know, spent his whole life not paying taxes, but go ahead. What your thoughts on this new development?
Inconceivable. It never would happen, but I don't think it should shock us that the Republicans would do this. I mean, they are obviously all in on the big lie, on the notion of the stolen election. They are enthralled to Trump. It's a cult of personality worthy of Jonestown. And that's just the way it is. But you know, I think that all we can do at this point is hope that the truth will come out through the January 6th committee. They're off to a great start, and a continuous drip of this kind of incriminating information may get us to a point where I once thought that the defining image of Mark Meadows was holding Donald Trump's coat as he delivered that speech that launched the insurrection. Look, it may not be too much to hope that the defining image is a prison door clanging shut. It could happen if the evidence is brought to light. And in that case, it really won't matter how many Republicans you convince. You've got to convince Merrick Garland.
Yeah, amen to that. And it is Jonestown, complete with them gulping the COVID coup.
Going to be out and about in northeastern South Dakota on Friday. Temperature.
New warnings about the rapid spread of Omicron, speaking of COVID, with cases doubling every 2 to 3 days. But a member of one of America's most famous families sees opportunity in all of the death and despair. Plus, the year.
What has happened? So much loss of life, mothers and fathers.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
After finding ways to avoid fiscal crises in the past few weeks, Democrats on Capitol Hill are now in a crunch time for critical parts of their agenda. Our Lisa Desjardins joins us to talk about 3 high-stakes issues that seem to be at pivot points: the Build Back Better bill, immigration, and voting rights. So hello, Lisa. A lot to keep track of. Yes. So Build Back Better, this has been a central part of the Biden agenda. Where does it stand?
Judy, Democrats wanted to get this through the Senate by Christmas, you'll remember. It looks like there is a very slim chance, if any, that that will happen. As we stand, of course, now just a little over a week until Christmas, there is not a fully fledged bill yet, and there are not yet 50 Democratic senators on board. So let's talk about the 2 scheduling problems that are important to know. First, one involves a Senate parliamentarian. As many of our viewers know, this bill must go through a process called reconciliation, which means it must show budgetary effect. Elizabeth McDonough, the parliamentarian, judges that. She, however, is recovering from a diagnosis of stage 3 cancer. And so in addition to this being a difficult bill for her to render opinions on behind closed doors, she's trying to give Democrats guidance, it is taking longer than usual because of her health. The second issue, Senator Joe Manchin. He has not yet signed on to the provisions of this bill. He is in meetings daily, sometimes I'm told hourly on this. Everyone wants him to sign on, but he is not there yet.
So, Lisa, we know that in the past few days, a big item in this bill, a lot of discussion around the child tax credit. That's been hanging in the balance. Where does that stand?
This is one of the issues that we heard from Senator
elderly and individuals with disabilities.
Perfectly free and fair election. So this is not a new problem. It is not unique to 2020.
I do believe there was voter fraud at a massive scale across this country. Can I pinpoint the evidence down and everything? No, absolutely not. I'm not privy to the scheme.
What I would say is that I don't think the election was fair, but I do think we have the results that we have. Each state does their own deal. I'm not a big fan of how that all played out.
Senator Benson, a follow-up though. Did President Biden win?
He was certified by Congress as having won the Electoral College.
He was certified. She couldn't bring herself to say yes. And that follow-up from Hugh Hewitt came after she went on and on and on about all the cheating out there. All they had to say, right, and should have said was yes, that was it. That's the answer. Remember that Associated Press analysis that we told you about last night? That they found that in 6 key swing states, there were 473 potential cases of voter fraud out of 25 million votes. And a recent CNN poll shows that Trump's big lie is destroying faith in future elections. Just 40% of Republicans now say they believe the 2020 midterms will even be fair. Out front now, John Kasich, 2-term Republican governor of Ohio, of course also served in Congress.
Are the new approaches working? Stephanie Goss goes inside one city's experiment in police reform.
In Burlington, Vermont, roll call looks a little different than it used to.
I know it was a long night.
Often just 5 officers are on shift for a city of more than 44,000 after Burlington's leaders cut the police force by nearly 30%, essentially imposing a hiring freeze.
We had huge numbers of people making real demands about changing policing, saying we don't want police to participate in certain kinds of calls for service, we don't want as many police, all of which had real merit, but none of which was being done with any kind of specificity or deliberation.
In the wake of George Floyd's murder, the city council voted to divert part of its police budget to social and racial justice programs. But working officers began to leave faster than anticipated, down to just 64 in a short period of time. Many who left felt like the city turned on them.
Do they tell you why?
They do.
What have they said to you?
The exit interviews have been pretty clear that it was about a lack of support in a political sense and a sense of saying that this is not how I want to serve anymore. I don't feel valued.
Councilor Zariah Hightower felt like reform was overdue.
We had all these issues leading up to the pandemic and leading up to the murder of George Floyd. For us, it wasn't just a national problem. It was a problem here at home.
Burlington police data shows black drivers have long been disproportionately stopped and then searched. And there were recent controversies over use of force involving black men and people with mental health issues.
We're a relatively good department, but it's kind of a low bar when you look at policing in America. And I do think that we've got great people in our police department who want to do the right thing, but that's not the same thing as the outcomes.
With fewer officers, some routine patrols stopped altogether.
They're just not there.
Mark Bouchette and his family have owned this home goods store for 35 years. He says the police couldn't respond quickly to disturbances, prioritizing more serious calls. He and his staff felt their absence.
They said, we don't feel safe in the evenings.
In Burlington, Vermont.
In Burlington, Vermont.
It's all taken its toll on those who remain.
What is the morale right now at the Burlington Police Department?
It's in rough shape. I know that what has been expressed to me from officers and even my own frustrations about the job not being able to police as effectively as we once could.
Realizing there was a problem this fall, the city council reversed course and voted to bring back more officers.
The resolution carries.
We're in a situation that I think nobody wanted us to get to.
In other words, there are some unintended consequences.
Oh, absolutely.
The department hired social workers to handle mental health calls and other community issues.
I will never betray my badge, my integrity.
Now, Chief John Murad is working to rebuild his ranks.
Ultimately, we don't want to defund. We want to fund. Good policing is expensive. I think that has ultimately proven to be a grand experiment on a national and local level that's gone awry.
Stephanie Gosk, NBC News, Burlington.
Up next, we want to tell you about 3 remarkable Americans honored for their courage and sacrifice.
To be a thriving.
Get compliments from people that come in and says, your pies look great. Or I'd be out in the Western Mall or Empire Mall and they'd say, Dave, your pies look great, and I don't even know who that person is.
Now, Dave says the best part about working as a baker is getting to see kids' reactions to his pies. He hopes to work 2 more years making pies at the Perkins on 41st Street before retiring. Tyler Roney will be along with a final check of our weather forecast when we come back here on KSFY.
The relationship that's really unique about that he needed, and I understand that text that was sent to Meadows was based on that guy who visited the White House, like 8 or 10 times, which is really kind of hard to believe. As to whether they wanted to instigate violence or whatever, I don't buy that, but I think I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that about somebody that I didn't know. But what they were clearly trying to do is to say, you know, that perhaps Pence had power to do things that he, of course, did not have in an effort to try to keep the election from going to Biden. It's sad. It's ridiculous, Aaron. It's just ridiculous. And it's almost Christmas week, and we got to deal with this, you know?
Yep.
It's just nuts.
Well, Governor, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Okay, Aaron. Thank you.
And next, President Biden just acknowledging a key part of his agenda will not pass this year, leaving Democrats, and I quote from sources, frustrated, disappointed with at least one member of their own party who actually is the one who stopped this. Plus, the officer who shot and killed Dante Wright says she plans to testify in her own defense, possibly tomorrow. It's a big deal. What will we hear?
She said, Uncle's had a heart attack. I needed him to be here.
Your heart isn't just yours. Protect it with Bayer aspirin. Be sure to talk to your doctor before you begin.
Right after Dakota News Now.
Are you looking?
Hear them saying we're adults now and we're concerned about these very large categories of people that Congress has not addressed.
And Lisa, we also heard that last young man say that they could end up with nothing. There could be nothing in the bill. Where does it stand?
This is one of those provisions that I think will just come down to the very final call by the Senate parliamentarian. Again, to do this, it has to show a budgetary effect. And this idea of parole giving a status to many undocumented immigrants, they would be charged a fee. That's a budgetary effect. But is that enough for the Senate parliamentarian to say it should go through. We're going to be watching this day by day as the parliamentarian reaches a decision.
And Lisa, we can't talk about all of what's going on without talking about voting rights. Right. And your reporting is that that voting rights and filibuster reform still being hotly debated in these final days.
Senate Democrats, amid all this, had an intense lunch today. That word was used, intense, and it was focused on voting rights. I want to talk about what's been going on in the last couple of weeks. There's been a sense that time is running out to pass voting rights reform. And I want to play some sound that we heard from the floor. There's a real dispute over what is best for democracy right now. Is it to change the rules of the U.S. Senate to pass voting rights, or is it to not change the rules? First, let's hear from Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia, who says, yes, it's time to change the rules.
So when colleagues in this chamber talk to me about bipartisanship, which I believe in, I just have to ask, at whose expense? Who is being asked to foot the bill for this bipartisanship? And is liberty itself the cost?
That idea that bipartisanship is the idea of the filibuster, which of course allows a minority in the Senate to rule the Senate, because you need 60 votes generally in order to break a filibuster. Now, the two reasons the filibuster rule is intact are Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. Kyrsten Sinema very strong on this point. I want to read a statement that her office gave me about why she thinks it should stay in place to defend democracy. Here's what she wrote. This is from her office. Senator Sinema continues to support the Senate's 60-vote threshold to protect the country from repeated radical reversals in federal policy, which would cement uncertainty, deepen divisions, and further erode Americans' confidence in our government. So here you see voting itself at stake, and the Senate as an institution at stake, and Democrats wrestling over what do we need to do? Do we change the rules to, in our view, protect voting, or do we protect the institution? And does that protect democracy? Right now, the truth is, though, Judy, Democrats do not have the votes to change the filibuster rules, but my sources tell me, people involved, they are trying to convince Manchin, and he seems to be listening, they say, to perhaps changing the rules so that there's a talking filibuster, for example, make it harder to filibuster.
Well, we know you're going to continue to watch this and all of it. Lisa Desjardins, thank you.
You're welcome.
A warning that this next segment contains sensitive content. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among young Americans. Most websites about suicide are aimed at prevention. But a New York Times investigation looks into one that provides information and directions for ending one's life. Amna Nawaz reports.
Judy, the site draws 6 million page views a month worldwide, 4 times as many as the U.S. National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And most visitors were 30 or younger. The New York Times reporters Gabriel Dance and Megan Twohey analyzed more than 1.2 million messages on the site. They examined members' online histories, combed through hundreds of pages of police and coroner records, and interviewed dozens of families left behind. And they found at least 45 deaths by suicide in multiple countries linked to the site. Megan Twohey and Gabriel Dance join me now. Welcome to you both, and thanks for making the time. Megan, it is a stunning report that you both have worked on. Those 45 suicides you linked to the site, though, they range from a 16-year-old girl in Illinois to a 58-year-old man in Texas. Do you have any way of knowing if other people also visited the site and then died by suicide?
Yeah, absolutely. Those were 45 deaths in which we were actually able to identify the person who died. And you're right, there was not only a 16-year-old, there was a 17-year-old, there were other teenagers. Most of those deaths were young people under 30. And what we found is that in analyzing more than 1 million messages on the site, we found that the true tally of deaths is likely hundreds more. We were able to analyze these goodbye threads, essentially people who came online and narrated their attempts as they were taking place. And through a very sophisticated process of analyzing those messages, we were able to find that 500 members, roughly 2 people per week, did such goodbye threads and then never posted again.
Gabriel, we should mention
Cabenuva and get medical help right away.
A circle that includes our researchers, driven by our
transformation into NFL legend Kurt Warner.
He wanted to play.
simply would not reflect what the Americans would feel here. So when I just had a chance to catch up with Joe Manchin, I asked him about the pressure he is getting from
tomorrow. We'll talk about that coming up.
A 4-month-long investigation came to a
pressure from you on CTC, on the child tax credit.
We're getting pressure from me?
They're pressuring you to change your position on the child tax
No one
credit.
pressures me.
I'm from West Virginia. Are you going to change your position on that? Yeah, but the way that's in the bill, the 1-year extension.
I've always been for child tax credit, always will be.
Thank you.
So at the end there, he says, I will always be for the child tax credit. But what he does not say is that he supports the structure of this, what's in the current bill, which is a 1-year extension. And Aaron, what he's suggesting would lead to a significant either dropping this provision altogether from the bill, which Democrats don't want to do, or to rewriting it in a substantial way. And that is something that could take some time, could take weeks, it could take months, and can they get their whole caucus behind that? And the rest of the changes that Joe Manchin wants in the weeks ahead is still a major question. Democrats thought this will be law by now, but it's possible it might not ever become law.
All right, Manu, thank you very much. And I want to go out front now to Democratic Senator Chris Coons. So, Senator Coons, do you share some of your fellow Democrats' frustrations with Senator Manchin tonight?
Well, certainly, Aaron, I share a sense of frustration that we are nearing the end of this year and we don't yet have a clear path towards enactment of the Build Back Better bill. But let me be clear about what's in President Biden's statement tonight and what I believe, having spoken to Senator Manchin just a few moments ago, as well as over recent days. Senator Manchin has reconfirmed to President Biden his willingness to pass a bill that is at the same scale as the framework they agreed on.
Better, and we're not category.
You know, you think back to what we had.
Of this interaction on the site, which really facilitates suicide and people following through with their plans.
And Gabriel, we should mention we are talking about this. You have uncovered this at a time when experts are ringing an alarm about a national emergency, a mental health crisis, particularly among young Americans. When you take a look at the numbers, just in the early part of 2020, emergency visits for mental health emergencies rose 24% for children aged 5 to 11, 31% for children aged 12 to 17. Suspected suicide attempts increased over 50% for girls 12 to 17. That was from early 2021. Compared to before the pandemic even began. And that leads me to one of the stories you tell, Gabriel, about a 16-year-old named Daniel Del Canto. He struggled with depression. His parents thought they'd gotten him help. He ended up on this site. Tell us the story of Daniel.
Yes, Daniel is a sad story. He was a 16-year-old boy in Salt Lake City, Utah, and living with his parents, his mother and father, and his younger sister. His older brother had recently gone to college. And Daniel had a stomach ailment, and it caused him great pain after eating, and he and his family were trying to figure out what that ailment was. But Daniel took to this suicide website where he really dumped all of his fears and anxieties into the website. He was worried that he would never be able to recover from the stomach ailment. And within days of showing up, a member of the site encouraged him to use a specific method to die, which is really tragic because it was clear that Daniel had no idea how to take his life before coming to the site. And again, within days, he was introduced to this method, and within 3 months, he had died on his bed, and his mom discovered him late that night. And his parents never had any idea he was on the site. They actually didn't even have an idea he was depressed. I spoke with his best friend and his best friend's mother. Neither of them had heard anything about the site. And all of them had wished that just at any point Daniel had mentioned that he was even thinking of dying by suicide so that they could intervene. But this website doesn't really help people with interventions as much as it helps them carry out any kind of plans they have to kill themselves.
Megan, the obvious question here is how is this site even up? I mean, I know you go into great lengths reporting on the 2 men who created it and continue to run it, but how is it still up and running?
I mean, that's a great question. As we carried out this investigation, we weren't just piecing together this long trail of deaths connected to the site. We were asking that very question. So many families left behind wanted desperately to see this site shut down and for the two shadowy figures who run the site to be held accountable. Now, those two men had gone to great lengths to hide their identities and to protect the websites. They moved their servers from country to country. They use companies that allow them to hide who's registered the domain names. And that made it really hard to not only, detect who they were, but to hold them accountable. There's a federal law that provides sweeping legal protections to website operators, even when the content on those sites is dangerous or even criminal. So Germany, Australia, Italy, these countries have taken action and have succeeded to some extent in restricting access to the website within their borders. But here in the United States, time and again, we've just seen officials look the other way.
It is a stunning report. The full report is available on the New York Times website. Megan Toohey and Gabriel Dans, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And if you or someone you know needs help, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is reachable 24 hours a day, 7 days a week by calling 1-800-273-8255.
Many of Italy's ski.
That is rubbish. At America's
8:20 item to become dangerous.
Trouble nailing the delivery. Behind these doors is a giant.
The death toll could shoot up 71%. The CDC says well over 15,000 people could die in a single week.
This is a health care crisis and people are going to die. It is not hyperbole.
As several pro sports teams deal with new outbreaks, so is Broadway. Many popular New York City shows forced to cancel performances because of breakthrough infections among cast members.
I thought they'd have a plan, but they were always just like, this is the first time this has happened to us.
Another sign of how unpredictable the pandemic can be. Health officials stress vaccines are the best way to fend off severe illness and death.
Boosting individuals who have already been vaccinated is going to be very, very important.
So what about families thinking about gathering for Christmas?
As long as everybody's vaccinated, everybody who's eligible to be boosted is boosted. I think it's quite safe. It's not 100%. Nothing is 100%.
The U.S. facing another winter dominated by COVID. With the federal government's deadline for all active duty members of the Army to get vaccinated now passed, the Army says that about 98% of soldiers have gotten at least one shot, 96% have gotten 2 shots, and about 4,000 soldiers have refused to be vaccinated. In Washington, Chris Pallone, NBC News.
The holiday is often a time for gathering with family and friends over a good meal, but everyone isn't that fortunate. So that's where Feeding South Dakota is stepping in. Volunteers with the organization spending the last 2 weeks putting together holiday meal boxes, or 10,000 of them to be exact. Each box has pork, stuffing, cranberries, and applesauce. These boxes will be handed out via Feeding South Dakota's mobile unit.
This is huge, just to give back. Our core values, are integrity, caring, commitment, growth, and teamwork. And I think we're putting all of that to action right now, working here today and giving back.
The meals are coming at a very good time. Feeding South Dakota's mobile unit has seen a 15 to 20% increase in visitors. Photojournalist Dave Howe giving us a closer look at this holiday operation. That's coming up tonight at 10 on Dakota News Now. 'Tis the season for holiday cheer and gift giving, but experts warn gift cards are a hot commodity for scammers. Find out how to protect yourself. That is when Dakota News Now continues right after this. Hey, Tyler.
Hey there, Sam. Well, we avoided the snowfall today, but most of the area not avoiding it tomorrow. We'll talk about
it makes me feel safe.
And to eat indoors, on or off the slopes until March 31st, you must have a...
In these volatile times, we've got you.
At the White House, Peter Doocy, Fox News.
One, Joe Manchin's name is on this bill, Joy, so we have to be honest about this. And it's same day. But number two, Joy, I'm in the middle of this every single day.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to give up. And I'm not going to give up on all the people that are going to be hurt by this. It's Bob Dole that once said, we're a first-class democracy, and we shouldn't treat people like second-class citizens, which is what's going on right now with what's happening in the states on voting. But right now, We are making the case to them. And they, and especially Senator Manchin, has signaled an openness to the standing filibuster. And there is a way, with Senator Merkley's help, that we can get to the point where we can come up with an agreement on a rules change. The president, vice president firmly behind it to get to that moment. I don't really have a choice, Joy, but to stay here and talk to them. There is no other option here. The Republicans, as you point out, are not going to come over to the table and suddenly say, kumbaya, we want to help the people, to allow people to vote. That's not helping, because their path to victory is all paved in gold with this idea of picking their own voters and limiting the people who voted in the last election. We get that. They get that. The stakes couldn't be higher.
Let me ask you about this is related. So the parliamentarian has ruled against the immigration plank that Democrats want to include in Build Back Better. This is going to affect, you know, hundreds of thousands of people if this can't be done. People who are really counting on Democrats to make it happen. Do you support the idea of another idea, overruling the parliamentarian, which has been done in the past, and allowing Vice President Harris to do the overruling of the parliamentarian, which a vice president has done in the past, and then going ahead and passing these bills? And if that overrule happened, could that bill pass with 50 votes?
Yes, yes. I think that option must be on the table, and I hope we have a vote on that. The question is, will everyone be on board? That's where we have to get to. But we cannot move forward. Our economy, actually, when we have, especially in my state, incredibly low unemployment rates, which is a great thing, but we need people working. We have restaurants, places that literally are shutting down because we don't have enough workers. So that is the strong economic argument for these work permits that were included in the House bill that passed the House of Representatives with Build Back Better, and that I strongly want to see. I would like to see a path to citizenship. I am an original sponsor of the bill that would provide for that. But right now, this is the next best thing that would allow us to go forward. So yes, of course, that's on the table.
Senator Amy Klobuchar, in her blue for sticking around for the holidays
because
to keep working.
Yes, exactly. I'm not someone that's going home.
I appreciate you always being willing to come on and you know, parry with me on these issues, because you know they're very important, and I know you care about them. So thank you very much, Senator. Happy holidays. Thank you.
Happy
Thank you
holidays
very much.
to you.
Cheers. Tonight's absolute worst is still ahead. But first, the defense is presenting its case in the trial of former Minnesota police officer Kim Potter for the deadly shooting of Dante Wright during a traffic stop. Potter is expected to take the stand tomorrow. We'll bring you the latest next.
I have something for you, too.
People who are abusing drugs, those types of things. When you don't have that system in place, then you see it start to fail. And I think that while progressives are very sensitive to the issues that we face.
They're wrapping me real quick, but I just got to get to this really. It almost sounds like the old argument about socialism, where it's, you know, socialists say, well, the reason socialism doesn't work because it's never been tried. What I'm hearing from you is sort of the utopia of not prosecuting crimes hasn't been tried correctly.
Well, I'm saying that we don't have the system in place to support those types of lenient activities, especially when we see the rent skyrocketing, when we don't have the services we used to have before the pandemic. A lot of these organizations that would help diffuse crimes and criminal activity, their doors are closed. People don't have access to those resources. So it's a perfect storm in a bad way of things not being open, resources not being available, and also people being desperate. And then when you roll back simple things like the number of police on the street and the number of police that are available to respond to crimes, that's a problem. Yeah. I think that's what we're seeing people push back on right now. And I think it needs to be done.
Yeah, you know, you make a point. It's a problem all over.
Be given as a gift, not as payment under a threat.
The Federal Trade Commission says if you pay.
There was no excuse for pulling even a taser in this specific case. So how does a jury weigh testimony that is just diametrically, opposed to like this?
I think the jury is going to look at the video, and the jury is going to listen to what both of them said. You know, every time we have officers that go out to work, any traffic stop can turn, it could be a simple traffic stop, or it could turn into a horrible situation. And the testimony today said, you know, this was a case that where a taser would have been required to keep the situation under control. And, you know, he was pretty believable. That coupled with the fact that the prosecution's case simply, it seems to say she should have known better. They haven't put on much more evidence than she should have known better. So it really puts the jury in a tough spot as far as finding her guilty.
So she told the judge she still plans to testify. What do you think of that decision, and how significant will it be, given what you just said, which is that there's, you know, there's real confusion here?
There's confusion, but there was no confusion about her reaction. If you take a look at the video of her reaction, she's mortified.
Yeah.
And I think that she will be a sympathetic witness. If they ask her anything, she will probably say that she's mortified and she would wish she could take it back. And she's not going to give them anything, I don't think, to show them that it was negligence. I think that the jury is going to have to make up their mind. Can an officer, a skilled officer that does training, make a mistake? A horrible, tragic mistake, but a mistake.
Right, well, that is the crucial question. And it comes down to such a human question as that. Thank you so much, Mayor. And that crucial testimony, of course, could be tomorrow. So next, it's a showdown, and we're going to take you this incredible story inside the battle over a piece of land, a volcano in this country that holds the key to powering electric cars, and a major decision tonight by the administration that could affect the entire fight over abortion rights.
For all of your local news stories, weather forecasts, and sport highlights, go to DakotaNewsNow.com and stay connected.